We are talking all things digitizing in this very extensive live stream. I've gotten so many questions about embroidery digitizing, and as y'all know, I am a embroidery machine hobbyist, but I'm not an expert. So I found one. Welcome to the Sewing Report. I'm Jennifer Moore. This channel is all about making sewing and crafts fun and approachable. And I've seen all of your questions about embroidery designs, how to get them into the machine, how to digitize images, like can you put a picture and stitch that out? And we're going to answer all of those. So I'm going to bring in my special guest today. This is Erich Campbell. He is an actual embroidery digitizing expert. Welcome, Erich.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. So Erich, so what we're going to be doing here is Erich and I are going to be talking about some of the very basic concepts about embroidery designs and digitizing. And then in the back half of this live stream, we're going to open it up to questions. So your question may be answered as we're talking, but I know you'll probably have additional questions. So we're going to try to answer these specific questions during the live Q&A. All right. So first off, Erich, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you, and what's your background with embroidery machines and digitizing?
Sure. Well, my name is Erich Campbell, as you know, but what you may not know is that I started out as a commercial embroidery digitizer right around 2000. And honestly, the background is that I started out doing this during getting ready for school. I actually have an unrelated degree in English medieval studies, so real moneymaker degree. But I worked as a machine operator, somebody hucking around boxes of shirts, and then I started to operate embroidery machines. And as I did that, I noticed we had a computer under a dust cover in the corner nobody talked about. I asked them what it was, and they said, oh, that's the digitizing computer. No one knows how to use it. I volunteered my way in, and I was, I'll say in scare quotes, allowed to take my own time after hours in the shop to learn how to digitize. And within about 3 months, I was a commercial digitizer running about 48 heads. So that's what we did. And personally, when I first was an operator, I had about 24 heads of embroidery machines I was running myself back then. And after that, it was all commercial stuff. So like the things you might imagine, we worked for Nautica, Chaps for Ralph Lauren, a couple of places like that, and a lot of local business to business stuff. Now, I have been an educator. I won some embroidery digitizing awards in the commercial world around 2008, 2009. And since then, I have written for magazines, educated. I teach a lot of the different conferences around the country, especially in the US. I usually teach at Impressions Expo, the DAX conferences. And I write for several magazines, including Images Magazine out in the UK, sometimes for Graphics Pro out here. And you'll find me kind of a little bit of everywhere. Apparelist, Mr. X Stitch is a blog that I've written for in the UK too. So all across the kind of home and commercial spectrum at this point. And now I also work with the folks over at Embrilliance, helping to develop their commercial program. So if you want to talk about that, I also do work for a software company now on the back end, helping them kind of develop what they're doing with digitizing and assets.
Yeah, and that's actually the program that I use and feature here at the Sewing Report. And by the way, this is not at all sponsored. I reached out to Erich because I found him online, and I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about, and that's what we need here at the Sewing Report. But I am a big Embrilliance fan because I find the software really easy to use, and it's great for beginners who might not do digitizing, but you're just taking designs and customizing them, maybe changing them around, adding a font, that kind of thing. Okay, so first, let's talk about the digitizing process itself.
Sure,
what exactly is embroidery digitizing? How do you explain it to total beginners?
I think the hardest part people have with the concept of digitizing is they think it's like conversion. And I'll first talk about what it's not, because this is something, and we will get into this again later. It's not a conversion process. It's not where you feed a graphic in and get something immediately out. Some softwares do that. I might talk a little bit later about why auto digitizing isn't really an answer for high quality embroidery. Digitizing as we know it now, as it is done in a commercial sense, and I think as it's done for the highest quality, is where we take an image that we want to turn into embroidery and we draw shapes on that image that reflect the areas that we want filled with stitches. We then assign stitches and we assign variables. So things like density and stitch type and underlays to those blocks. And we plan that out in sequence to create something that the embroidery machine can understand. So what we have to understand is we're essentially programming in a very easy way through drawing and through very user-friendly tools at this point. Back in the day, it was done one stitch at a time in the early days of digitizing. Now we draw blocks of area that we want filled with stitches. We tell the software what that block should be filled with stitches, what kind of stitches, and how they should look. and then we output a file that the machine understands. So that's really what it's about. There is some drawing involved, there's some understanding of stitch types and some variables involved. And that's how we get kind of this artistic rendering. It's an art of interpretation, not just conversion. We interpret the thing we want into stitches.
Now,
So
I get so many comments where people think they can take like a JPEG image or a PNG and just import it into the machine and stitch it out. Now, you cannot do that, right? You can't just take a picture and plug it into the embroidery machine.
Here's what I'll say. No, you can't. You can't just take a JPEG or a PNG or any file and just send it directly to the embroidery machine and it spits out embroidery. Are there softwares that do auto digitizing? There are. Now, the first thing, if you don't mind bringing up my screen for a second, I'll show you a couple examples of stuff.
All right, here we go.
About it. And I may have to file through some stuff. I'm actually going to use some slides from some of the commercial. Ooh. And by the way, these are paid classes that I'm going to show you some stuff from. So extra value.
All right. So wow. All right. And we're getting here for free today. All right. Awesome.
Yeah. First thing I'm just going to show you, this is an image I did for a cover of Stitches magazine. Wow. And so on the left-hand side is the photograph I started with. On the right-hand side is the finished embroidery. And the thing that I want you to notice is that there's all these different stitch types and textures that are in this. The computer can see edges of blocks of color. So whenever we're doing auto digitizing, it looks for the edges of colored blocks in whatever software does auto. Embrilliance actually does not do auto digitizing because we don't think it provides the best quality. The thing is, you'll see here, yes, there's a lot of this kind of white color in the horse. Well, I actually blocked it out where I have some satin stitches in the mane. I have some curved fills being used in the neck. I have curved fills in the body. I have different pieces that are in the face. And in fact, if I back this up to a detail shot of this piece, you're going to see that there's all these different little blocks of stitches. And I drew these individually so that when this is on a person, now this is done for a magazine cover, but this is on a jacket back, as the person moves, the light will move across all these different stitches. And because they're at different angles, it reflects differently off of the different stitch angles and patterns. This is what a digitizer can do that you can't do in auto digitizing software. And in fact, I can show you another kind of example of this. If we're talking about auto digitizing, essentially as we deal with it for a lot of the softwares, even with something super simple like a silhouette, we can have some issues with that too. And I think I can bring this up. So if I, hopefully I'll get this right for you guys and we'll go from the right page on this one.
All right, here we go.
We have some slides. Here's the thing. I'll show you some auto digitizing. This is why it's not really a solution.
Yeah.
If we're looking on the left-hand side of this, I actually was brought this by a church group that wanted to do this dive team. They were sending down to Belize to do this diving adventure. And on the left-hand side is what they brought me from someone. This is auto digitized. It's all fill stitch going in two directions. You'll also see, I'll kind of use my cursor to show this. Over by the face here, some of the stitches are missing. There's pieces that are broken, and all of these little loops and strands that are coming off of them. So like the snorkels and things that might be there. Those pieces are actually in fill stitch, and there's too many stitch penetration points. This is going to break thread. Mm-hmm. This is not a really good quality look. The piece on the right is what I actually gave them. And this was me deciding to look at what a diver looks like, say, where is the arm? Where are the belts? How are the legs? And use satin stitches for the legs because they're kind of cylindrical objects that are narrow. They work very well with the ribbon-like nature of satin stitch. Satin stitch has nice shadows and highlights. And throughout, I broke this up into multiple pieces, and we ended up with this nice silhouette version where it has texture when you look at it. This detail over here was actually lower stitch count than what was on the left, aside from it when we added the border. And on top of it, the customer came back after this, and in a commercial sense, they came to us with these pieces. We had 12 pieces. When I showed them the sample, they were so awed by it. They loved it so much that they came back in, bought another 18 pieces, and then they brought all of their printing and embroidery to us after the fact. We end up being their primary source for apparel. And it was all based on the fact that rather than kick out this auto-digitized solution, I gave them something that was a little nicer.
Yeah, you can't even tell what that thing on the left was. Like,
you don't. A little unfortunate, you know.
That's a pretty big fail, I would think. And somebody to think that somebody would pay for that is kind of baffling to me.
Yeah, it's not that people have good intentions doing this stuff. You know, they want to make something nice. But at the same time, a little bit of learning about how to draw some shapes is not super hard to do. It takes a little bit of time. Learning about how stitch types look and how they work helps. And I have one more example. I'll go really quickly through it. This is a piece I did for a company called Habitica. It's an icon from their logo. I like to show these simple like silhouettes because it's the simplest thing you can do. You would imagine auto digitizing is going to do a great job with it, right? Well, things that are important to them is that it has that pixelated looking tail. It's kind of a griffin. You can see it's got wings and all that going on. But the initial stuff that I got out of auto digitizing looked like this.
Wow.
Now, you can tweak settings and get it to look better, but as you can see on the left-hand side, we got all those big split satins. They're going to pull a
Mhm.
lot of material. In the middle, we actually were missing some of the detail got paved over where it shouldn't. On the right-hand side, we're missing some stitches in the tail. And we've got, yes, it looks okay, but because this has no compensation, which is where we know stitches change shape on the machine, this is going to leave gaps and holes. It's not a terrible thing. It doesn't look horrible over here on the right-hand side, but it's not really, artistic. I decided to do this piece for them. And like I said, the computer sees the shapes. It can only see the outline of the shapes and decide how far apart they are and is that good for the kind of stitch type we want to use. But this is what I did. And I did this honestly on a home machine on my own because I wanted to do the sample quickly. This is off of a Brother PE800, no lie.
All right.
I did this at home because I wanted to do it quickly. I didn't have a commercial machine at handy, but I wanted to make this for this company and show it to them. And you can see I carved out the individual little lines of the pixels in the tail, the wing, the beak, the talons, and the body has a different texture than this haunch. And it's got this cool little look. And this is what the customer ended up with. I actually ended up subbing these out to a large emblem company, but they used my digitizing in the end.
Yeah, that looks amazing. And yeah, you can really sometimes tell the difference between the quality of the digitizing. And I've hired people off of Etsy to do digitizing. And sometimes you can tell they just did the auto digitizer and didn't take the time you did to really plan out the design and draw it like that. So that's really, I think these examples are great to see, just to see the difference between the auto digitizing and the actual like when a digitizing artist actually draws it out. So question, if you're a total beginner and you don't know anything about digitizing, how does someone even begin to get into it and to learn about it?
The first thing I would do is, I know it sounds funny, but read the manual. Everybody says, read the friendly manual, and friendly is not always the word they tell you, but that is what they say. Read the manuals for your software because they will tell you how to operate some of that stuff. That is a portion of it. The other portion is learning about embroidery and watching good designs run. I think how I got good, at least how I started out and I got up and running quickly, is that I was a machine operator. And back in the day, I was running old 12 needle machines. They didn't have thread break sensors on them. They called us watchers because we would walk up and down the machines watching to make sure that there weren't any thread breaks because we had to manually stop the machines and walk them back. So I watched designs run, and embroidery is this really holistic thing where stabilizer and fabric and thread and tension and the file all come together under the machine to make something happen. And all of them are part of what makes the embroidery work. There's nothing like watching designs run to see how stitches distort, how materials react when you put thousands of holes through them, how they react to the tension of the stitching, and what's going to happen with your own design when you start to digitize. So part of it is that watch designs run, examine the kind of stitch types they use, pull up designs from your favorite stock design artists. If you know they run well, pull them up in your software and do things like measure stitch lengths, measure how much they overlap different blocks of stitches, look at the angles that they're using. Do an analysis on that design. What did this person do? And can I use the same techniques in my own software to create something? So it's all about consuming embroidery. And it sounds funny, but really you need to watch things run and use good digitizers as part of your lesson plan. I think people want to start digitizing all their own stuff, and it's okay to outsource to a good digitizer who does solid work. Learn, watch their stuff run, analyze their designs, and learn while you're learning to digitize yourself. And then you just kind of change the mix. How much is you and how much is your outsource? And I think that's fine. Even in the commercial world, I tell people, don't be ashamed of outsourcing that digitizing. And also, if you're someone who doesn't want to do this all the time or shove the
That's
needles,
me. That's me.
it's okay to have somebody do it forever. I know commercial embroiderers who have never digitized. They buy all their stuff from people they trust. What I would say, though, learning the terminology behind it, learning about like pull and push compensation, stuff that we haven't really dug into, the more meaty parts of it, will help you to communicate to a digitizer when something's going wrong on your machine. And that is still useful. That's
such helpful information. And it's interesting, too, because a lot of people want to jump into doing an embroidery business, and they don't really, I don't think they understand how much is involved with the digitizing. And then the other thing I'm seeing, too, is that people are like, oh, well, I'm already a graphic designer, so it should be pretty easy for me, right? What would you have to say to that? Is that going to give them a leg up or no?
It can. It can. I think the only problem is if you don't think about the material things that happen, and I can even show examples in a little bit about pull and push
Ooh.
compensation to show that. If you don't think about what's going to happen when we get on the machine, and there is a difference. Here's the thing. What I'll say this: the digital preview, the screen, is never what's going to be on the machine. If your shapes look perfect in the software, they will be distorted on the machine. You have to distort them yourself intentionally to deal with things like pull and push, the ways that stitches always distort. And I'll just say this, any stitch on screen, if you have a column of satin stitches, it's vertical, it will always get narrower and it will always get taller, always. Stitches pull in toward the center and they push out toward the open ends. And it happens with fills, it happens with satin stitches. Satins are really easy to see, and text is where it's really easy to see it. But the honest truth is people don't think about the material side of it, or they haven't run embroidery machines, or they haven't done any embroidery or sewing or anything. And then they go into this trying to make a print job and just add stitches to it. That will not work. You have to understand the material side of it to make it work. Where there is a leg up for graphic designers is literally in the fact that you know how to draw vector, and the initial part of making embroidery designs is drawing shapes. If you're going to digitize, you will need to draw shapes, and those shapes are what we eventually apply stitches to. You have to understand the stitches to draw the correct shapes and to put them in order the way they should be and to overlap them the way they should be overlapped. But you won't have that secondary problem where somebody who's coming from sewing or embroidery might know the materials very well, but literally just has trouble with like Bezier curves or drawing points, or they aren't really a digital art person. That's hard for them. But that's the thing. I sometimes think I can take a good operator who really knows embroidery will probably understand why the embroidery is doing something quicker than a graphic artist and can possibly be taught simple drawing skills quicker. Whereas I think sometimes graphic artists will come into it thinking they're going to get it, but they've never touched thread. They've literally never threaded a needle. They seem to have a little bit harder time, and it's more about breaking the habit of trusting the screen.
Is it possible to be a great digitizer without being able to operate an embroidery machine? What do you think?
Personally, this is where I'm a little controversial. I think no. It's not that you can't do well. You can do well. You can learn. And there are lots of digitizers who will allow someone who's buying from them, they'll discount their work, or they have people who are buying from them sample their designs for them. That is fully fine. I'm not coming against that and saying there's no way that's ever okay. When I was doing full tilt commercial digitizing in-house, my operators ran all my samples, but for me, that was actually useful because I knew how they were going to run them. I wasn't going to baby them in my process as I ran them on the machine and then get weird results because I'm doing something different than what they did. But if you've never touched an embroidery machine, I'll just say this, your learning curve is going to be steeper. You're going to have to learn remotely, and you don't get that immediate connection between watching what's happening on the machine in the hoop and digitizing. And here's the other thing that makes people go wrong all the time. It's the set it and forget it mindset. They plug in the design, they start it, and we know it's going to take an hour to run, if it's especially on really slow kind of home machines, and they don't watch anything happen. They walk away and then come back only when something goes wrong. If you're trying to learn to digitize or learning a new technique, it's the quickest way to miss critical information is to walk away. Your first run, when you've ever digitized something, you should probably be sitting next to it.
I do that regardless. It seems like whenever you walk away from the machine, that's when something goes wrong. So I've learned from now, you literally have to sit and like I might be watching a show or something or listening to a podcast, but whenever I walk away, that's when I get like the thread snag or something goes totally off and it ends up being a disaster. So if someone's learning digitizing, I know everybody's different, but how much time should you allow to for the educational process? Like, are you talking like, is it something can pick up in weeks, or is it more like months, years?
It depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, there's different levels of digitizing. Like I showed you guys the one piece where it was, the carousel horse has a fair amount of things going on.
Yeah, that's not a beginner project, I'm thinking.
If you're doing blending and shading and textures, that's going to take you some more time. But a lot of that is because you're absorbing what stitches look like, what thread can do, how can you make marks with stitches. And if you're somebody who is a consumer of like embroidery, you go look at embroidery or textile arts, you'll pick some of those tips up earlier, especially if you're watching a lot of good designs or literally looking at fashion designs or home decor or any embroidery you see, just looking at it and thinking about it, you're going to get some of that stuff quicker. But if you just want to go out there and you want an applique design, especially like really simple applique letters, that's a couple days. You can learn that. That's not hard. You can do that pretty simply because there's less distortion that goes on. There are less troubles with that kind of embroidery. A simple shape, a happy face, is quickly done. The only thing I'll say about that is circles have a tendency to distort, and I can talk about that in more detail. But there's a tendency for shapes to distort. If you get past that portion, simple appliques, simple designs are not going to take that much time. It's more about learning about the distortion and about materials. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have trouble with like density. Let me just say this. When someone talks about density for embroidery, to go from a completely beginner mindset here, you'll see these numbers. They are either a measurement in embroidery points, and Embrilliance uses embroidery points, and some other software they use millimeters. And they're going to say, okay, you're at a 4-point density. What that actually is a measurement of is the space between courses of stitching. It's not a measurement of the stitches themselves, it's space. So as that number gets bigger, you're putting less stitching in the area. People have problems with that. They don't get the coverage right because they think, okay, it's 4 and it doesn't cover enough. I'm going to go to 5. And
then that covers less. Okay.
It's a measurement of space between rows of stitching. So density is one of the things people really have trouble with. And so they put things on highly textured materials. They don't use underlay, which is stitching that's used to support your top stitching. And they end up with like stuff coming through, loops of toweling coming through. They don't use the knockdown stitch that like Enthusiast has. And they end up with kind of these bad results. And they're very angry with embroidery when it's really about a couple of key things they need to learn. Like, what does density mean? Well, an embroidery point is 1/10 of a millimeter. It's literally 4 points is 4/10 of a millimeter between 2 courses of stitching. It's really highly technical, but you don't need to know it like that. You just need to know that with standard 40 weight thread, about 4 points is a really solid fill. 4-point spacing is going to be a really solid fill because that's going to have thread sitting edge to edge on your surface.
Okay, so
understanding that stuff. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk some of these software options and the prices, because it can be a bit of a stick. People get sticker shock because I think they don't understand how expensive some of the softwares are. So what are some of the popular software options, and then what are the price points for them?
Well, it depends. You're going to find things that depending on what kind of specials are being run and stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and be clear with everybody right now. I do work with the folks over in Embrilliance. So take that as it will. You know that I work with
not sponsored though.
Yeah, not sponsored.
Not sponsored.
This is not a paid spot, and I'm not here being paid at all either. But I do work for Embrilliance, so you guys know that ahead of time. I like to make sure that's clear. I have used just about every software in the commercial world and many of the home softwares as well. Really popular, of course, Embrilliance. We're talking about that here. So if you're digitizing, that would be the Stitch Artist line. And those, like I said, those are modular. It depends on what you want to purchase. I can look those up and show you exact prices for all of that. Certainly, it depends on what you want to have in there, because there's Essentials, Enthusiast, the Stitch Artist line, Density Repair Kit. Each of these things are actually modular. Some other softwares aren't modular, but build up in levels. Hatch is another very popular software as well. And their top end has everything. They have the customizer and the digitizer, and that usually runs around in the $1,000 range, $1,000, $1,100. We are substantially less than that to get you up running. We can get you there if you buy all the different modules. So it depends on if the software is modular or not. So that's something to look for. If it's something modular, do you just want a couple of modules and you're only going to be doing, like, let's say you're only doing customizing, you either want to buy a lower level, like in Hatch would be a lower level. In Embrilliance, you'd probably just buy Essentials. And that would be your basic customizing and text. You want to go into digitizing, then you're adding more modules. Whereas in Hatch, you're just going up levels to get to those tools. And I'll say this is the first thing I'm going to say, though. No matter what it is you're using, and there are plenty of other brands out there. There's Chroma and Pulse. If you're in the commercial world, Pulse and Wilcom itself are out there. Certainly, you'll see those. You'll see all of the machine model manufacturers also have a software that go with them. Without mentioning every software out there, I'm just going to say this. Every software can produce a masterpiece of a degree. Mostly what makes you a good digitizer is your understanding of embroidery and making marks of stitches. If you understand the stresses that embroidery is under, so you can get your outlines to line up, you can get your shapes to be the right shape that you want to be, and you understand how to make marks with stitches in the way that you want things to look, you can use any software to make anything, because there is only one real stitch in embroidery. Just like a sewing machine, we can only make one line from point to point, and everything else is just a collection of those lines. So any software ultimately can make any design that's out there. It depends on how efficient it is for you and how much it supports you doing the creative work you're going to do. It'll make you faster, not necessarily better. There are tools that are artistic and help you out, But if you don't have an underpinning of kind of like steeping yourself in what embroidery is, you're going to find it harder to make the things you want to make.
All right, so we gotta ask you about the free software everyone's talking about, Ink Stitch. Do you
Okay.
have any thoughts about this free software, which I know it's very popular because it's low cost or no
Sure.
cost? And do you have any thoughts on the quality of the software and the designs it produces?
Here's what I'll say. You can make a quality design, like I said, in any software, because you can manually, like in the original days of digitizing, they used these big, and I know I'm going off on a tangent slightly. They used these big magnetic puck boards that were on the wall. Everything was drawn out on paper, like almost like an architect would do, at a 6-to-1 ratio, and you punched every stitch. You clicked.
Oh my gosh, that sounds tedious.
Incredibly tedious and very expensive. So you can make anything with a tool that can do one stitch at a time. However, what I'm going to say is this. If you look at the different softwares that are out there, they will provide you different tools that make things easier. And the one problem I have with Ink Stitch that keeps me from really recommending it is that you essentially draw this vector plan for where stitches are going to be, and you only see the stitches after you process it.
Okay.
So you tell it, okay, make some stitches, and then it makes stitches. But then if you want to go back and edit, the stitches aren't there. You have to go back to this plan of these vector shapes, and you can't work into the stitches. Like if I go back, and I can go ahead and bring back up.
Oh yeah, sure.
Let me see if I can bring back up design. I'll have to just show you.
Cool.
Like I'll bring up, this is Stitch Artist. I'm going to bring up a design that I can show you the actual design later. This is a design I did for a Netflix TV show called Chambers. I think Uma Thurman was in it. I've done some.
And what were they getting embroidered? Like shirts or something?
These are jackets. I can actually show you the jacket itself. Let me go ahead and pull that up. Nice. This is the actual piece.
Hey, that looks pretty good.
And this is a very simple piece, right? But what you're going to see is all these little textures and stuff in it. It's only a couple colors, but there's all these different textures where you have satin stitches and fill stitches and shading. The thing is, if I want that shading to work with the kind of stitch type that's underneath it, and one of the things I'll mention is if you want stitches to kind of fall into each other, they should be on the same angle. If you want them to stand off from what's behind them, they should be at a different angle, because it literally is like building a foundation. Things will kind of fall together if they're on the same angle. They will stand on top of each other if you have something at the opposite angle under them. If I'm working in Ink Stitch, I might not be able to see the stitches underneath that I'm working into. I'm not going to see the angles of the stitches that I'm working into. And so doing like organic shading, and this is not quite as critical in this particular piece, but it's the one that I have pulled up, or I can actually bring up the Stitches cover. Here's a version of Stitches cover. If I'm going in here, and you guys saw the original thing, if I'm trying to put this shading in here, and I'm shading these individual stitches into the satin stitch that's in here, I need to be able to see those stitches. I've got on a black background that I can actually hide, and I'm going to go ahead and hide that so it's easier to see what we're doing. But let's hide that out a little bit, and if I deselect it, you'll see that I can see the stitches that I'm working my way into. And if I want my stitching, these ones are just a little off angle so that they don't sit down quite as far into the fill. I can decide how I'm going to work these little stitches into each other. Or if I have this where it's actually 2 layers of a kind of fill-like stitch that was done manually to get a shaded area, I want to work into the empty spaces from the earlier level that I have here. And there's a lot of places where I'm doing something like that. Like if we go over to this side, there's a reflection that you can't really see without the black background into it, but you'll see that I've worked one fill into the other fill. If I'm working where I can't see the stitches underneath, I can't really do that. And this one uses a great deal of the background color. So to really see what that looks like, I'd have to turn the background color back on. But if I go ahead and turn that back on, you'll see there's a reflection of one of the other horses that's in the mirror here, that's or in the glass as they're passing it. But whenever we're working into detail, we have to work into the existing stitches, and that's why I kind of don't love Ink Stitch as much. It's not that it's necessarily bad. You can make great embroidery with any software, but when we're doing the kind of work that requires us to be aware of the other stitching, like these greens that are here, in the final piece, it looks like I have 5 greens. I only have 3. Only using 3 thread colors, because if we look in here, you'll actually see that every other line here, this is 2 lower density fills, and I've blended the 2 colors together.
Okay.
Doing that when you cannot see your other stitches is very difficult. It's something that would be, you'd be processing it over and over just to see where you were. So
that's sort of the downside of the free Ink Stitch software is...
like I said, I don't want to ever tell somebody that, where they are isn't good. I mean, I think you can make masterpieces in any software. but having all the tools makes a difference. And I mean, this is a piece that was done natively in Stitch Artist. And you can see there's all these different pieces and they're all done in order. And if we look at something even like this, we have this little arrowhead here. Remember how I kind of talked about the stitches not being exactly where you think they're going to be in the final piece. I'll go ahead and hide this, which is the original artwork. I'll hide the artwork layer. And you're going to see how this fill inside of this arrowhead stops early.
Yeah,
it stops
right.
early before I get here. Also, you see how the ends of these stitch points are outside of the outline?
Yes.
That's compensating for the pull and push.
And that'll show up inside the outline when it stitches out?
Yes. When it actually stitches out, you'll see there's no red sticking out of the outside. I mean, it's harder to see here. There's none of the little blue on here. You don't see the blue feathers coming out of the outside edge. But if I switch back to this piece again, and we'll go ahead and move up to where we were, and you'll see me panning through, look at these gaps.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I see that. And it won't show up in the so you're definitely compensating for the fabric.
I'm compensating
by making those changes.
And actually, I've got this up, and I'll go ahead and show you guys.
That's so interesting.
Let's go ahead and go back to push and pull compensation. I'm sorry, I'm tracking back through these real quickly, but here's the thing to understand. This is what pull and push compensation is really easy to see on lettering because it's made out of satin stitches. Everything goes in the same directions, but this is what we want to see. Push compensation is going to go out toward the ends, going to pull in toward the centers, and that means when we're looking at lettering, our finished baseline will stop early in the direction of push. We'll swing wide in the direction of pull. And then I just put this in here because even on true type fonts, you'll notice that round letters have optical balance. They're made a little taller because round letters in our eye tend to look a little shorter. And that's literally just kind of, it's your brain does that. That's not an embroidery thing. But here for the pull and push, we'll see that that's always happening. So when we draw something, if we want this satin stitch here, this little outline shape is what we actually have to draw. Okay. We have to draw that shape to make that column. And so we have that embroidered outcome, the digitized shape are different. And it's really evident. You'll see this is a preview over here, a digital preview of this patch. And it looks like the T is taller than the I. The E goes lower than the I. If we look at the actual piece over here, they're even. That is all about compensating in the software. And it's more than just a variable. I mean, we can talk about how it happens, but this is the thing people see a lot of the time. You'll see these gaps along the edges of outlines. You have to overlap further because we know if it's going to pull in this direction, this satin stitch is going to get narrower. If they're just touching on the edge, if they just perfectly line up, they're going to pull apart when we actually run them because we know that we're always going to have a little bit of pull. We're always going to have a little bit of push. Same thing here. We have this edge, these little gaps. It's the same thing that I showed you from those feathers. Very similar thing. Same thing happens with fills. This is one that was poorly compensated on a hat. Little red stitches pop out, top and bottom. Same thing. It's always perpendicular to that angle of the stitches. So stitch angles goes like this. This is where the stitches are running. To opposite of that angle is where you're going to see push. Another thing I just wanted to show you very briefly is this shape distortion. This makes people very frustrated because we can draw things perfectly with our vector style tool these days. We will draw a perfect circle and set our stitch angle. And then when we go into our actual embroidery, we end up with the egg. We end up with this oval. And that's because we actually have to make the oval ahead of time. You have to be wider along the length of that stitch angle and shorter on the push dimension, contrary to it. It's just something that takes time to figure out.
It seems like there's a lot of trial and error with this. Like you might make a design, stitch it out, and then figure out where you need to change the compensation and then go back and tweak it. Is there a lot of that going on?
Absolutely, especially when you first start. In fact, I'll show you a couple things. First, here's a terrible design from my first week of doing work.
Nice.
It's terrible.
Nice. Hey, you know what this is? Thank you for showing. You know what though? You have to start somewhere, right?
Yes.
And you can improve.
Exactly. And this is the thing. I did some digital art when I was younger. I mean, I started out doing some of that stuff for myself when I was in school. And I drew perfect circles and it ended up like this. And the borders fell apart. And we've got some of this edge showing through. It's supposed to be circular. And you can see the text is closer to where the circle should have been. So this was one of my very first designs. And it ran terribly. But you can see this. You just have to counteract it. If I had stretched it out in this direction, compressed it in this direction, I could fix it. Plus, I can measure how much I'm off on the first sample, and then I can correct it in the software by that literal measurement. Like if I'm off a few like 3 millimeters on both sides, if I just grab that out and move it, the next run, as long as all my materials are the same, my stabilizer is the same, I haven't changed anything on the machine, I'll be right on the next run. You just have to quit trusting the
Mhm.
screen to tell you what's right. You have to trust the embroidery. The screen
Do
doesn't
you
matter.
do you feel like that's where a graphic design background might actually be kind of a handicap because I know they rely on what's on the screen? Like, what do you think?
Maybe I'll say
A little
this.
bit.
People come into this kind of work expecting that the computer's doing the work for you.
Mhm.
The concept of digitizing is I'm going to let a computer make embroidery for me. That is just not the case. And I think it's frustrating when people figure out that commercial digitizers like me who've been doing this for many years can still once in a while just like work on a new material and run off a sample and still have to make corrections for
Yeah.
it. It's very normal to do that. The other thing they do, they don't want to run their initial sample. Either they don't want to spend any time running a sample at all,
Mhm.
or they run the sample on materials that aren't the
Yeah,
materials
they're
they're
not the
going to use in
same
the final
thing. Yeah.
base.
Yeah,
Yes,
and I always recommend too that people do a test stitch out on the same material or something that's fairly equivalent.
right on the
And
nose.
because if you're stitching something out on quilting cotton, you're going to get vastly different results than on a thin t-shirt material. And
Absolutely.
that's where people run into problems. This is so interesting. I know after watching this, digitizing is not my wheelhouse, but that's why I've got you here, Eric. And that's why we are going to be taking questions in a little
For
bit. So
sure. For
so
sure.
definitely stay with us for that. So here's another obviously it seems like digitizing is an ongoing learning process and
Surely.
there's never a point where you're going to be like 100% expert level. But at what point should someone feel comfortable with selling their work? Like what do you recommend?
The way I feel about it is this: when you can reliably get results without concern, when you feel like you can reliably put out results that are working well on your machines that you don't have to question, then it's okay for you to sell your work. What I would say is people want to jump in too quickly. Pretty frequently, they want to do a lot of auto conversion and just sell it
Yeah.
because they have a good idea for a design. Better by far to get with a digitizer and have them make that idea. If all you want to do is come up with the ideas, that's the creative part that you want to work on, then do that part and have somebody else do the digitizing. Even if you're going to digitize later, that's fine. When you can reliably make a file that runs and you're sure it runs well in the context for which it was made, then you can sell. I mean, I was doing commercial work within weeks, and I was doing full-time commercial work for a decently sized business shop that had national clients within months. Back in the day when I first started, people told me you didn't get good for a year. They would just say, you're not going to be good. You're not going to be decent enough to sell for a year. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I will also say I was doing 18 and 20-hour days back then. I was really working my full shift and then sitting down with the machines and sleeping on the floor in my office. I did that when I first started. It's not for everybody to do that. You should give yourself the time it takes, but you'll certainly advance your ability to get this done by going between the machine and the software. I can't stress enough that running embroidery is going to make you a better digitizer always.
Yeah. Now, lots of people who are doing research about embroidery machines and digitizing, they obviously want to do it as a business.
Sure.
What like now you're in the business.
Yeah.
What are the economic prospects for embroidery businesses, and what do you think the best embroidery businesses? Maybe what do they have in common as far as their like factors for success?
I'll say this. I'm going to give it a non-answer answer to part
Okay,
of
that's
this
all
because
right.
this is what I often have to do. I've seen tons of people make the same models that don't work in one place that work in another. You have to know the audience that you're pitching to,
Mhm.
and you have to be able to target them correctly. The first thing somebody will tell me when they're selling embroidery is I'll ask them what their audience is, who they're selling to, and they say everybody because they're hungry for jobs. And I understand the company I worked for did a little bit of everything for a lot of different people,
Mhm.
but we were primarily good at certain things that made a difference to us. And the thing is, if you don't have anything that is a standout wow factor for your work, or if you don't have a niche to which you can sell where you have a deep understanding of what they need or what they want, you're going to find it harder to just generally hang out a shingle and say, I'm a commodity embroiderer, bring me garments or bring me art and I'll produce something for you, because that's something that any online embroidery can give you. What I usually say to the people in my community once they kind of get their technical chops down is be a consultant, not a commodity.
Mhm.
Be someone who provides answers for what they want. Ask them what they're trying to do. Understand how a piece is going to be viewed. Like, if it's a very different thing making embroidery for someone behind a counter who's an employee, or making embroidery that's going to be worn by someone who's a fan of your brand. That's a very different kind of embroidery, and you need to know what is popular, what is good for those different groups, and know that someone can value something differently depending on the context. It's not always going to be the same kind of value or market standard depending on what you're doing. You can do boutique work. One of the ones I always like to talk about is bridal. I have seen people charge immense amounts of money for very few stitches when it comes to things that are in the bridal market, because it's a high value market. Whereas the same number of stitches, the same time spent in the business to business market won't get you the same kind of profit margin. It just doesn't. So you have to know where you're at and find, I think, a specialty that's good for you. And I'll say this, niche marketing also makes it easier for people who don't know how to sell. If you feel a little weird about selling, it bothers you what you're selling into, or you feel like, oh, I'm a used car salesperson, I'm not really, I'm doing this weird sales thing, it feels bad. If you sell into a niche you belong to, you can say, all right, I understand these people. I know what they want because I belong to them. I speak their language. They trust me because I understand either this subculture or this hobby or whatever other interest it is that's driving all of us. And I'm recommending things that I believe would make their lives better, that they would enjoy, to people who I like. Recommending things to a friend feels a lot better than selling. Is it still selling? Yes. But I think if we don't feel like we trust our own work enough that we would recommend it, then we're probably not done getting ourselves together. We're not probably ready to sell at all. Our work should be good enough. Every time somebody says, well, I do quality work, and I'm like, that's the bar of entry.
Yeah.
You have to do quality work to sell. You have to do at least quality enough work that people don't look at it and think that it is lesser than what they could get somewhere else. It should be quality work before you're selling. But then the next point above that, the next thing that's beyond that is, how can I provide a solution to them that helps them market themselves or celebrate their event or whatever it is they're doing? When they come to me, it's not just, here's the garment, here's the logo, put these two things together. It's more like, here's what I'm trying to do, here's my budget, here's my art. And then you go back and say, this is the best way I can make that as an embroidery for you. This is my best interpretation that is unique to embroidery, and what I can do as far as, if you're providing garments, whatever it is, that solves your problem, that helps you promote yourself, that makes your business look cool, that makes your family trip better, that is enjoyable to wear, that looks cool, that's fun. Whatever it is that they're trying to do, whether it is kind of a fun home market thing, whether it is a commercial promotional thing, you want to market to what they need, to filling a need. You want to help them as a consultant rather than just say, I put stitches on whatever you bring me. Mm-hmm. It's just too many people out there doing that. And it doesn't really, there's no sparkle to it unless you at least show some of your best work and say, I do interesting work. That can be part of it. But realize then you need to make sure that cool work is profitable for you.
All right. This is kind of a rando question.
Sure.
Are there any embroidery trends that you want to see die and never return? I know this is kind of weird.
It's hard.
Like, I watched one of your shows and you were talking about the trends. Are there any trends that you just hate? Like, maybe you just don't like them, or you find them just really frustrating to do? Like,
not so much trends that I don't like as much as there are certain things people ask for that I never can give them, so I don't love doing them. And that is, if you want a full size jacket back embroidery, I mean, you want like a 1 by 2 feet of embroidery on the back of a light t-shirt, it's just not going to be good. I can do it for you.
That's a good. Yeah.
But yeah, heavy embroideries on light garments are just not the best match, because I tend to be one of these people who thinks of the garment holistically. Someone's going to put this thing on, it's going to be scratchy and heavy and cardboard-like and bulletproof, and I don't want that next to their skin any more than I would want it on me or a kid, especially when they had kids wear that has really heavy embroideries on it. I'm like, learn that the experience of the garment is wearing it, and if it feels uncomfortable to wear and it's terrible, then nobody's going to want to wear it. Outerwear can have heavy embroidery on it. I remember I had a company that used to bring me tons of different garments. We did what we called customer supply in our business, and they would bring us a big box of garments that they wanted the same logo on everything. So not creative, commodity work. So not my favorite kind of work. But they would always have this heavy logo, and all this stuff is like big garments and Carhartt jackets and all this heavy stuff. And then like 3 tissue burnout t-shirts.
And you're like, oh geez, that's
Here we go. No stabilizer on earth is going to make this both turn out, not tear through the t-shirt, and feel okay on a human being.
Yeah, those thin, the thin knits are probably the most frustrating to do.
Yes. For
Oh
sure.
man.
I would say that. There's other couple things. There's a certain brand of hats that I will not name where the central seam on a structured 6-panel cap is awful to sew through. It always
Mhm.
throws off the embroidery and looks terrible. If people started to love 5-panel hats, I know they look like old dad trucker hats. They're nice for embroidery though, so I would love to run more of them, but I know they don't look all that nice. There's certain brands of hats I don't love running, and so I'll tell you the truth. What I do is when I'm in the commercial space selling, I don't sell those hats first. People
You're
have to
like, all right,
request those
you're
hats.
trying to point them to the things that are
And also they're
easier to
run
do.
well, that look
Yeah.
nice, that the embroidery pairs nicely with. I think people don't think of the entirety of the garment and the embroidery. In
Yeah.
fact, that's what here's what I actually wish would go away in the promotional products market. It's what we call the logo slap. And a good friend of mine,
Okay.
Jeremy
The
Picker,
logo
said that.
slap.
The logo slap. Jeremy Picker said this, and I love this guy. So if you see his stuff out there, Amber Designs, Picker Media, he's a good guy. The logo slap is where you take the same art, and no matter what you're putting it on, it's on a cup, it's on a hat, it's on a jacket, same art, same size, slap it everywhere. It is just a logo on everything, and there's no thought to it. You don't make a creative solution for just one kind of design. You don't do a cool thing that coordinates, or like a small thing that works in the small area on the hat, but a larger thing on the jacket. It's just the same logo on everything, and they don't take any time to think about it. It's just plug and play, same logo on every garment. I don't love that. I like coordinating sets.
Yeah.
I like
Like
different sizes. And
like hey, maybe on the tissue t-shirt you do something very light and
yes, or print.
whatever.
That's
Yeah,
it.
like there's
And
nothing wrong with
sometimes it's the
screen
right thing.
printing.
Yes.
Or and then save the big logo for the Carhartt jacket. That's so
Totally.
true because I've seen
Totally.
items where I feel like the embroidery just didn't make a lot of sense, and the
There's tons of that.
design and just the design itself didn't work with just the item.
All
And
the time. It's not even rare. It's absolutely all the time that people will use these heavy designs because they don't, honestly, it's a digitizing thing. They get something digitized once and they don't want to have different versions.
yeah,
But then what I tell people is go look at any sports team, go look at any big brand, go to a streetwear store. DC hats. Do you think that they use the same logo on everything? No, they have
yeah,
new
no,
colorways,
definitely
new
not.
styles. And even if it's just changing the colors up or changing the position on the hat, they're going to come up with these new styles, but it is still their logo and identifiable. And we can do that in the business world too. We can do that with our own stuff that we create too. We can make our own versions of stuff. There's no reason why retail has to be the only place where we do something stylish that people like to wear. And especially if you're doing it commercially for an employee, employees love to wear cool stuff too. They don't want to wear logo slap stuff.
Oh, I've gotten so I've mentioned this before. I'm a former TV news producer, and when you're working in newsrooms, you just tend to get all of the station logo stuff all the time. So I
I've made a
have a
lot of
lot
it.
of I've got a lot of that stuff, and some of it's
Yeah.
pretty like bizarre. Like things I'm like, why did you, like I would have one station I worked at, they had station branded chapstick and like just weird stuff. I'm like, why does anyone want chapstick with, like they just want to do this marketing. It's like just crazy marketing, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Or I'm like, I don't know.
That's something that's coming up now. In the industry, we have another term that we've been throwing around called brand fill.
Brand fill? I like these things.
Stuff that's meant to be thrown out, that's not going to last. And now
it's like, why are you wasting the money if someone's going to throw out the item immediately?
Higher quality items are becoming more common. Also, I'll tell you this, I love making patches. It's one of the things I love the most, is why when we made Merrily over at Embrilliance, I was deeply involved in that and really loved making a Merrily and being part of the assets on that team, because we use patches sometimes to reuse high quality garments that have logos we want to cover. And everybody would say, oh, I can't believe you would cover a logo. But anybody's in the commercial embroidery business, someone will come. Funny enough, real estate is where I worked for a long time too.
Oh, that's true, because they change brokerages or whatever.
And they'll have this super high end, like a $300, Columbia jacket that they want to change the logo on. And so I can make a patch that covers it. It doesn't make the wearability any different. You can't tell unless you're looking inside the lining. And it makes that garment have another life. And whereas that used to be seen as you're being cheap, you're not marking things up, now it's like visible mending is a trend, especially in the home world. Now we're talking about not just throwing things out. We're talking about higher quality garments. And even if you're a commercial person, if you plan ahead, what you do is say, sell them a garment knowing that you may cover the logo later, and explain that that's possible to them, let them know. And
then they're like, hey, we don't have to buy all new jackets. We can just reuse the jackets. Or like you were talking about employees with their names And then
Yes.
when they leave, you just replace the employee's name with the new employee's name.
Oh yeah, uniforming programs have been doing that forever, and I think that back in the day, it was just it was economy. That's why we did it. Now, when people are saying they want things that are more eco-friendly, I think
Mm,
what we end up doing is we can't keep discounting the decoration process. We used to discount the decoration process heavily because we were going to make a markup on providing the garments. When you're not providing the garment, then you have to make sure that you're charging
yeah.
adequately for your work. Because the other thing I tell people all the time, and this is whether you're doing this for an artistic pursuit or a craft or commercially, you're spending the limited hours of your lifespan doing this thing. You should be getting something out of it that you love or providing for yourself. You shouldn't be throwing those hours away. There's no reason to throw the hours away.
Yeah.
So make sure that whatever it is you're doing, you're getting something out of it that feeds you, whether that's creatively or monetarily. It should be feeding you and making sure that
and
you have what you need.
I can see a lot of customers coming to you and thinking that it's going to be much cheaper if they provide old t-shirts or something. But sometimes I imagine that probably makes it more difficult if it's used items.
It can.
I imagine it might have some complications.
Here's the thing that I'll say. This is another one you asked earlier. What would I like to get rid of forever? I do have a couple others.
Oh, all right.
I would say I used to occasionally do things for the equestrian market. I don't ever want another horse blanket that's fresh off of the horse.
Oh,
I used to get pieces that were right out of kind of really rough environments. Or I'd have contractors would bring in a jacket and want to have something added to it, and it's just
just looks pretty rough.
Or honestly, they're just unwashed and filthy. And there were a couple times where I finally said, "Hey guys, you need to launder this before you bring it in."
You've never gotten unused underwear, right? That would be a weird one.
But absolute shirts. And the other bad one was people would bring a hat for a sample graphic, essentially. Like they wanted to reproduce a hat. They don't have a graphic or something flat for me to work off of. They'd bring a hat in, and here's the horrible story, because these are fun. I'll just tell the story.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
I hate doing football coaches, the youth football coaches, because I had a couple of guys who they'd bring me these hats, and the first time I looked at this hat, went, wow, it's a weird colorway. It kind of fades from the crown to the brim. I'm like, that's a weird hat. I don't know how we're going to replace that. And then I opened the bag that the hat was in, and it hit me. I'm like, oh no, it's a sweat ring that goes all the way from the bottom up to halfway up the hat. It was bleached from being worn so much. And I was like, I sealed it back up in its bag, and I'm like, I took a couple pictures.
You're like, no, thanks.
Yeah, I took a couple pictures of the logo, and I told the salesperson, this can live in your office until I'm done with my part of the work.
Oh my gosh.
So I will say that customer supplied stuff, you do have to tell people ahead of time, everything must be freshly laundered. Everything has to be clean.
Yeah.
It can't come to you directly from being worn. And also because honestly, like with the horse tack, a lot of minerally dirt that's getting into your very expensive machine, especially if you have a commercial machine like the ones that are in my green screen behind me. You don't want that down in the bobbin case. You don't want that anywhere near, because burrs and scratches on the hook, the rotary hook, will cause thread breaks and shredding. So yeah, when you're working with custom supplied garments, they need to be clean and they need to be ready to work.
I can't believe people would submit those things for you to work on, but hey.
It's pretty rare, but it happened often enough for me to complain about it.
Oh my gosh. Well, wow. All right. So we've gone over some of the basics, and we've had some fun stories. All right. So in this next half, we're going to be answering your questions. So if you're watching right now and you haven't had your question answered, or you have additional questions, leave them in the chat, and Erich is going to answer them. And we're also going to take this time right now to do a promotion for Erich's social media. So hold on a second. All right. So first off, I want to direct you to Erich Campbell's YouTube channel. I actually took some time and went through some of your shows and your videos. You have a lot of content here. So folks, if you're watching this afterwards and you have some questions, you should head over to Erich's YouTube channel, because he's probably he has a lot of videos, guys. So he's probably talked about the topic you're interested in already. Look at how many videos you have. Also, give him a subscribe, especially if you're interested in anything digitizing or embroidery machines, or if you have a business, because you talk about a lot of business aspects. You talk about the money, and it's pretty interesting. You're also very easy to watch. So that really gave me a good sense of who you were before we did this show. So check out for sure the YouTube channel. You have a show. So you have two shows. I see you have the Take Up and then the Half. What are the differences between those two programs?
Well, the take up is essentially it's just me. Mostly, it's me being a talking head. But I will talk about something often digitizing, sometimes embroidery, and then sometimes embroidery business or apparel business. And that's an hour to an hour and a half of me just kind of chatting with you. So I will go off on topics. I will talk about it. Usually, is pretty prepared, but it's not a very produced show. It's a live show, very much like what we're doing
So yeah,
here.
you can ask, so
So
if
you can
your
ask questions
questions on
live.
it, yeah. So if
Yes.
you're watching this afterwards, you can watch
Yeah.
one of Eric's streams
Yep.
and ask your question there.
Absolutely.
And
the
then
half,
what is the half?
the half is usually myself and my friend Aaron Montgomery from our success group, and we just take a half hour to talk about anything we want to. This
I
is
like that.
I actually produce another podcast called the Two Regular Guys Show, which is Aaron
Okay.
and Terry, Aaron Montgomery and Terry
Let's see
Combs,
here.
and yeah, that's that show I produce, and then after that show, Aaron and I were always kind of talking about topics, and we would continue on this valuable
Okay,
stuff
why
that we
not?
talk about. So we're like, all right, let's just make that into a show. And so the half became that show also because we didn't always have time to talk to all of our listeners. So on the half, if you come in and you say hi, we say hi. We talk to every single person who
Nice.
comments on the half. And honestly, if we waste the whole half hour doing that, that's fine. It's
Hey,
more like
that's
our community coffee circle.
okay. All right,
Yeah.
that's cool. All right, and I'm also going to pull up your website so people can check out. You are on pretty much all social media platforms. So if you guys want to follow Erich there, you can certainly do that. All right, so here is your website. It's erichcampbell.com, and the Erich has an additional H. How
Yes,
so?
it does.
I was wondering too, what's with the H at the end of Erich? Like, is that like a family thing?
Yeah, it's a German spelling.
Okay.
German spelling of Erich. It's after my grandfather. So Erich, if you guys
Erich,
know that.
okay.
So yeah, but yeah, that's the spelling, and honestly, that's all that is. But what I will say, it is infinitely helpful for Google because there's not too many of us.
Yeah, it's true. So you're probably one of the. So yeah, you're not going to get confused with all of the other
No.
Erich Campbell's. So you have a blog.
I do. I admit the blog has gotten a little
That's
long
all
in the
right.
tooth. I'm not doing as much on the blog as I used to now that I do
Right.
the take up.
You can
But
contact
me
Erich
there.
on
Yes.
the website. And you said you do online classes?
I do sometimes do online
Okay.
classes. They're not currently up on the site. I've been doing them through Decorators Community, which is a project of Two Regular Guys. But you can learn a little bit about more
Yeah.
about me there. There is some information. There are some blog posts that are current. And the great thing about it is if you ever forget how to get to my YouTube stuff for the take up,
Yeah, everything's here. Yeah, look
it's
at
all here.
guys. Your Facebook, your Twitter,
Yeah.
your Pinterest, LinkedIn. I don't know what's
It's Behance, but I haven't used
Behance. Oh,
Behance in
got
a
it.
very long
Okay.
time. I
Okay.
need to take that off of
YouTube.
there. But yeah, and Instagram, I have some stuff up there. Some
Instagram.
interesting stuff. But the cool thing about the take up tab here is the
Yeah.
latest video is always up, and when the new one gets launched, which is usually the day before it goes live, so Thursday night you'll see it launch, or Thursday you'll see it launch, and then you can get the latest update. So that on Friday, it's 2:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm out here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's
Woo.
when I go live every Friday, and I very rarely miss it. So if you show up for that, that's where you get a hold of me. But the entire playlist is there. My Facebook link is there, and I am fairly active on Facebook.
Yeah, you seem very active online. So I know we talked before we went live about you getting a lot of Breaking Bad comments. Have you seen the show? Are you a fan? Like what?
I used to do props for the show. So
You
yeah,
wait. All right, we buried the lead here. You used to do. All right, we got to hear about some of your entertainment stuff. So you used to do props for the Breaking Bad. Well, what kind of props?
Yeah, let me go ahead and bring up my screen.
Oh my
real
gosh!
quick. I can
Yeah,
actually
holy
show you
crap!
just a little bit. Most of the stuff, Breaking Bad was mostly, let me see. I've got this on screen here. There's just a link where I talk about this because I actually did an interview with Terry the Guys.
Oh my gosh! Look at this.
First, this is actually for a show called The Night Shift from NBC. So that's one of the shows that I did a lot of.
Oh
Almost everything on The Night Shift.
Okay,
Night
so
Shift,
you made their like fake whatever the police
all
department
of it.
was or whatever.
Yeah, all
Okay,
of it.
that's cool.
I'm big into patches, and where I started doing patches was really for this. And this, by the way, this is one of those things I talked about with business, having something that was your thing you do.
Yeah.
We said yes to creative projects. And we used to be able to do patches in-house very quickly because I did in-house digitizing, and not everybody had that. So someone would show up like in the morning with art, and by the evening I had to have patches out. And that was something that we could do, and it was really rare because we had in-house art and digitizing. And also in the end of it, because I actually did a bunch of stuff for like Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office and actual real law enforcement, they would send me something that was kind of like a law enforcement patch, and I would use the right fonts, use the right sizes, and show them a sample and go, all right, here's what you sent me. Here's what it would really look like if this was a real law enforcement patch. And they just trusted me to be kind of a small part of their costuming team, of their design team.
So to make it look like it was whatever fake, whatever it was. That's so cool.
That's a still from one of the episodes. So if you saw it, it was on NBC for a while. This one is, like I said, night shift, and they were in like a hospital in Texas. So it was a lot of like emergency stuff and police. And this was actually like a flashback episode where people are in Turkey, I believe. And so I did all the sets of patches for that. But if we're looking, this is AMC's Preacher, and I actually have a better picture of that. It was on my memories today for Facebook. So this is AMC's Preacher.
Oh my gosh.
This is actually on screen being used. What was funny
is super cool.
I made this cool patch that I loved really much, and then they just ground dirt into it and made it look terrible because, of course, it had to be screened.
Is it supposed to be old or something?
But this is the actual patch. So they took my poor little cow and they ground dirt into it and made it look rough. But yeah, that's AMC's Preacher that was on. So one of the AMC kind of shows at the time. And then I'll go back over here for a second. If I scroll down here, you'll see I've did a bunch of like other stuff here, but this is actually Better Call Saul.
Nice. Better Call Saul.
Yeah, more of the on-screen stuff during the early episodes of Better Call Saul. I left digitizing commercially in the middle of the Better Call Saul run, so I didn't do all the stuff. But season 1, season 2, if you saw any patches, any embroidery on Better Call Saul,
I'll be looking for that now. It is on Netflix now too, so we can check that out. Albuquerque Police.
So that's the actual patch from Better Call Saul. And what was funny about this is everybody's like, oh, nobody probably ever sees your work. And what I'm going to say is this. I remember distinctly when they first aired this episode, and I was in a store with TVs on the wall where they were doing promos for the episode. Mm-hmm. And I see this thing on like a 50-inch TV, and I'm like, oh yeah, you can sure see it. It was bigger than life size.
Nice.
But at the same time, I was so upset because one of my operators, I think, clipped one of the edges. I saw a little fuzzy sticking out of it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" One of my operators clipped the patch.
without getting super specific, does the entertainment industry typically pay pretty well for props?
Oh yes. Okay,
absolutely. So it's a pretty lucrative custom business if you can get your way into there.
It can be, but the difference I always tell people when I talk about decorating for film and TV, and actually this episode I did talked about it, the big difference is always this. When you're just embroidering patches for anyone else, you have some time to do it. When you're doing it for film and TV, it's exactly the same, but you have like a nervous, sweaty-handed personal assistant standing in your shop who won't leave until they're in their hands.
Oh, geez.
So it's stressful, it's fast, but you get paid a lot more per piece. Like each individual piece is going to be a higher rate.
They seem to have really big budgets for shows and movies and stuff.
Well, and especially when they kind of come with their hat in their hand. Because what often happened to us, in fact, how we started in this, is that we had people who were looking for patches being made small runs, so very small numbers of patches. Custom digitizing in-house had to be done in-house. Nobody could see it. It can't be sent out to another company. And everybody said no. We were the third shop, I think. Wow. The first order we did for this production company who ended up doing Breaking Bad, we were like the third shop that they talked to, if I remember correctly, how that worked. Third or fourth shop, and people said no. And I was like, I'll give it a shot. Sure. What's the turnaround? What can we do? And just saying yes and being able to produce it in-house, knowing how to cut your applique, knowing how to produce patches yourself, knowing how to edge them we didn't have what is called a marrowing machine, which is very much like a serger and overlock machine that is traditionally used for edging patches. Nowadays, if you have like Embrilliance has Merrowly, or a good friend of mine, Jeff Fuller, makes stock designs where we have a faux marrowed border that looks like that machine border, it would look even more accurate. But I could make a border on a patch and have a clean edge using water-soluble materials or other soluble materials. And other shops wouldn't do that because it wasn't the traditional throw a shirt on the machine and run it.
Yeah. So, it seems like some businesses have a hard time thinking out of the box when someone comes to them with something unusual. Do they have you sign an NDA and everything?
Not always. Sometimes we did.
Sometimes
we had some movies we did. I remember we had a couple of them that we did where we had to sign NDAs. I don't know how, they're probably all gone now because all published and produced. But I also remember sometimes I was like, wow, you guys should have, because they would drop off art packages. And I remember distinctly one day I was working on one of the Terminator movies. And I opened it up and I'm like, I know things about the plot from the
So you could have leaked that stuff if that's interesting.
But you learn when you're doing this that your word is your bond. You make sure that you're always on time and you don't tell anybody anything until the movie's out. Until the movie's out, you don't do it. So there were times where I wanted to share things with people, and it was over a year between doing the project and being able to share. Like the Independence Day sequel, I worked on that piece. But the other thing that happens, it's heartbreaking. Like we did these really big pieces for Independence Day, the reboot. And A bunch of them got in the cutting room floor. They're in deleted
Oh
scenes.
no.
So only one of the embroidered
Oh.
pieces we did ended up on screen, and some of the big screen printing we did, the entire plot line where they had these big screen printed flags that we did. We had all of this difficulty setting
And
them
then
up.
they didn't. Oh my gosh.
Entirely cut from the final movie. But
That's
that
so
happens
crazy.
a
And
lot.
they probably paid a lot for all those things.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then it ends up kind of getting wasted, I guess.
Because we end up doing research. You're like, how do
Yeah.
I have to figure out something that's non-standard. And I remember distinctly that screen printing job, because I was in a multi-decorating shop, I didn't have a lot to do with it. But the screen printing folks, they had their biggest frames. They were printing on the floor. They were drying things manually. They were all this really hard work because it was really non-standard. It was not the kind of thing you would usually use to make some of these things happen. But that's the thing. If you're open to it, though, and you make clear what your job is worth, and you're clear about the pricing, and you can deliver. That's the thing. You have to be able to deliver.
Yeah, and they have really tight. They probably have very tight timelines.
Very.
Wow.
I often ended up having to do things like multimedia and printing. I would add sublimation printing to the process and do some of it sublimated and some of it embroidered because we literally didn't have time to get those stitches into a garment quick enough. So sometimes you just had to, either for creative reasons or for literally embroidery time, you would have to make multimedia designs to make it work. But yeah,
have you ever pulled an all-nighter trying to get all of this stuff done?
Yeah, for multiple reasons. Also for sports events, we've also done that too.
Oh yeah. Sports is probably that's probably a big niche too, if you can get into that. All right, so we do have a few questions. All right, so let's get started with the questions. All right, so this one's from Cindy. She asks, hello. When you're digitizing a design, how do you create it to work on multiple kinds of fabrics? Also, when I purchase a design, how do I know it'll work with the fabric I'm using? That's a good one.
It's a good one. And unfortunately, I'll say this, that there's some of this that's going to be a little hard to answer, or at least it won't be a clear-cut solution for you. You will see that some designs in stock design categories will be digitized for something specific. If you see that it has light stitching on it or is digitized for toweling or something, especially the home market is better about specific projects. But when we're talking about apparel, a lot of the time we do what's kind of a middle best version of things. And the way that I learned it when I first was doing stock design work myself was to digitize for a medium textured knit, because it has a little bit of stretch and a little bit of texture, and it'll work okay with the design or the digitizing of the density that it takes to cover one of those. So our go-to used to be a piqué polo shirt. If it works on a medium piqué polo shirt, cotton piqué polo shirt, and it covers and it doesn't stretch too much and it runs, you can run it on something a little lighter or a little heavier and still get an okay result. The problem that you're going to have is when you go to something that is very, very different. If you're running something for, let's say you're doing like lab coats and use that same design on a thick garment, toweling, or a robe, or if you put that on a really heavy sweatshirt, you may have to add some compensation if you see things like the outlines coming out of register. So how are you going to know if it's going to work on multiple kinds of fabric? Most of them are going to work on anything in the range of a light to medium garment is going to be fine. If you have something extreme, that's where you're usually going to see problems. And you might have to do things like, if you're working on something with heavy piles or toweling or something thick, you might have to use a global underlay like knockdown, which is an Embrilliance term for it, or lay down stitching, mesh stitching, some sort of backup stitching to hold down piles of things that are loopy or fuzzy, or you may have to do some other work to the design. Usually stock design stuff is going to run kind of a little heavy on light garments and a little light on super heavy garments, but be okay.
That is really good information to know. So if I'm getting something digitized, if it's a good digitizer, I should be able to tell them, hey, I'm planning on doing this on a t-shirt or a jacket, and maybe they would that helps them create the design. That's really good to know, because I'm not going to be doing it myself. Yeah, that's really cool. All right.
Specifically, like things that have a lot of texture and stretch or grooves in them, like knit hats. You need to tell somebody you're going to run something on knit hats because it has a really vertical grain. It stretches a lot, and the digitizer absolutely has to prepare the design for that. But then you should not expect that you're going to have something that runs beautifully on knit hats, run on everything else, unless you're just using something like knockdown to hold things down.
That's true. So if you are working with a digitizer and you want to do different things, you should say, hey, can you do a few different versions? Like, hey, this one's for heavy knits. This one's for, canvas or something. And
I think you should always tell them what kind of material. You should always tell them what kind of material you're going to run. But the thing is, you're not always going to be able to have one design that runs on everything, and you're not always going to need multiple designs. But if a digitizer absolutely says there's no difference and you're telling them that you're running on everything from, a huge, thick quilted
Then you may not
jacket,
want to pick them. Is that what you're
they don't
saying? Okay. Okay.
there is a difference between them. A lot of the times it has to do with the surface quality of the design as well. Sometimes a couple layers are not going to make a big difference comparatively, and depending on your design. If your design doesn't have any outlines to register and it's a simple single color thing like a monogram, it might get thicker or thinner, but you won't have massive failures like you might
Yeah,
with a
it's true.
seven
Yeah,
color
it's
design
going to
with
be
a lot of
less
outlines.
noticeable if there's some small issues.
Yeah.
That's really good to know. That's actually really helpful to know. All right, this next question is from Meep Merp. How do you determine how much to charge for digitizing? I find most people don't understand that these designs aren't just a copy paste to create.
This is a super tough question because
Yeah.
people have all sorts of different ways. When I usually teach this, I teach different models. It depends on whether or not you are a digitizer on your own or if you're someone who's digitizing in-house for a company that's doing embroidery. But it's not going to be a one and done decision of what you're going to charge. It's more about, do you have something about your digitizing that is unique that you can promote? Because honestly, we're completing on a global stage. Not everybody has the same kind of costs of living that we do. If you're a US-based digitizer, especially, you're going to find that it's hard to compete on commodity digitizing. In that case, I find that digitizers who are doing the best work here, who are getting paid decently here, are people who are big on communication, who sample and show samples so they can have kind of proof of what's going on and they charge accordingly. And honestly, it really is dependent on your skill and the kind of work you're doing. I tend to say, as far as a model for charging for digitizing, I like to do a complexity model rather than a stitch-based model. Some people will try and do it very much like embroidery, where they're doing it by thousands of stitches. But a big giant letter E that has a satin border on it, if it's the size of the entire jacket back, can be digitized in 5 minutes, but have tremendous numbers of stitches. Whereas a left chest design that has a lot of detail can take you a lot of time to draw all the shapes and have very few stitches in comparison. So I would say look toward complexity. Certainly you have to look at what the market is out there, but if you want to charge rates that aren't the same as the kind of Fiverr, I hate to say it, the really, really cheap rates that we get from overseas digitizers, you're going to have to sell yourself as a trustworthy companion in someone in their kind of embroidery journey, where they're going to be able to talk to you, you're going to be available to help them with solutions, and where you're providing a version of this where you may have an embroidery machine, you're sewing things out yourself, you're helping them with problem solving. It's very much like the consultant versus commodity thing. If you want to charge something that's worthwhile here, you're going to probably have to be above and beyond and helping people out more than someone who's doing the base rate, files in, files out kind of digitizing. So
that's a really good point to bring up too. Because I found just in the creative world in general, creating a name for yourself and building that is really important,
huge.
Especially with being present on social media and just being more well known. Like I'm sure someone on YouTube who's a videographer who has 1 million subscribers probably gets people approaching them a lot for jobs. And that's their
Absolutely.
marketing. But the person with 5 followers on Instagram might not get a lot of opportunities. So it is really important. I think you're right. Like you need to differentiate yourself and find a way to stand out, because there is a lot of competition in many of these areas. And there's a lot of people who are trying to start embroidery businesses.
Absolutely. And you have to show the kind of work that you want to do. That's huge. Show the kind of work you want to do and show the work that you think makes you stand out. And let me bring up my screen real quick here. And I'm just going to show you something. I'll say, as someone who teaches, I constantly get people asking me to digitize for them. And this is one of the articles that comes up over and over. I cannot tell you how many times, literally a day sometimes, people ask me, will you make a gradient for this logo? Because it's something difficult to do in digitizing. People assume this is automatic, that it is going to be done by software. But this is, if we look at this piece, that's like a 6-color rainbow gradient from top to bottom. And this was done manually. I manually laid this out. And this one is stitch by stitch. I'll actually show you some that are a little bit less. You can see how these are individual colors layered together.
Oh my gosh.
So when it stitches, this is how it's stitching out. And I actually sampled this on my little home machine at home because I just wanted to show every little step. But this is a rainbow gradient. This is done by understanding densities and layering things together. But the target density of this is the same as one standard fill. So it's not dense. It's very flexible. It's light stitching and it feels nice on the skin. This is something that takes a little bit of technical skill. But even with a piece like this that's done with multiple layers of fill, you have to be very careful with your ratios, and you make this out of multiple blocks. This is something that's hard to do. And because these are out there in the world for people to see, I have requests almost daily, and sometimes multiple times a day, for me to come in as a digitizer and get paid quite a lot more than anyone overseas usually does to create a specific piece for a company that has a gradient in their logo. So if you do something that is above and beyond the usual, if you do something that is pertinent specifically to a subculture or to a style, let's say that you have just a handle on the idea of what motorcycle style jacket patches should be. If you start an Instagram where you show people wearing your patches, and you continue to show real motorcycle enthusiasts wearing your patches every day, and you keep showing up for it, and you show up in their Facebook groups, in the enthusiast Facebook groups for the category you want to sell into. And when someone says, hey, how do you get this done? You say, not just, here's my price sheet. You go, here's one that I did that's similar to what you want to do. Is this what you're looking for? I'm somebody who does this. I can tell you about how it's done. Provide actual valuable answers. And then as a digitizer, you're going to get more of that work. I will fully admit that in this day and age where we have a global marketplace, it can be harder. It can be harder for digitizers in the States who want to charge higher rates to get it, because people will just say, I can get it done for $5, and that happens. Sometimes that happens where they're going to say that, and you say, that's okay. They're not your customer. That's the thing I want to tell you. They're not your customer. They were never going to be your customer if the bargain is the whole thing. So yeah, show the kind of work you want to do. Get out there and find the thing that is the wow factor for your kind of design. And that can even be the kind of designs you do. I actually have a small set of stock designs, and I'm not putting it up here to sell them, because I really don't care if anybody ever buys these. They're just fun. I talked about how I was in medieval studies before I started.
Yeah, you did. You have a really interesting background, and you worked with Breaking Bad. You worked with some TV shows. That's awesome.
It's fun stuff. Well, I do Viking designs. I actually put some on screen. I'll just show you one of them. I won't even have to say the URL. But the thing is, because I do these designs that I liked, and a couple of them are these Viking age style designs, like this one here. This design, despite being kind of a really simple design, people like this design. And then other people who are into Scandinavian design will then call up and say they see some of these either Anglo-Saxon or Scandinavian designs that I've done because of my medieval history kind of background. And these designs have got me tons of people who ask me to do similar work. And these are very simple, not difficult designs, but they're in a strange kind of, subcategory. And you're going to find that happens to you, that's the kind of stuff. Even when I did niche marketing, my initial niche marketing, one of the other weird things I do is I play folk embroidery or folk instruments, folk music instruments. I play something called a mountain dulcimer. So I used to hang out with folk music players. And I started making designs for these really specific, rare, strange folk instruments. And I had this built-in little market. So once I showed people some of the pieces I was doing for that, all these other musicians wanted these similar styles, and I started doing a bunch of work for folk musicians. It's about knowing that there's these niches out there and then making pieces that are interesting for the niche. Once they see this piece, they go, oh, that style is really cool. And it might not be all that difficult. It's just that it applies to a style, or it's something they haven't seen. It's the long tail. People who have deep interests, but they may not be being served. It's great kind of blue sky area for you to be able to look for new clients. And I think that's the thing. You never know what weird thing that you like is going to be interesting to somebody. Or honestly, sometimes I just make my own weird art that I feel like drawing, and that's what I do. And it has been just stuff that I'm interested in. Or I'll do pieces that show off embroidery. This is one that I often bring. This is a single color piece.
Yeah, single color.
That is all silver metallic thread. That's all it is. All of the detail, all the texture, all the shadows is stitch types. It's stitch types and stitch angles that make it different. So this is one that I use for education. There's multiple ways you can kind of use your digitizing and sell it. And I think you can also open yourself up to new markets. What's funny is because this is a no mask, I had other people asking me to do more no masks. Now, I didn't go and do a bunch of them. I mean, I did this piece for my own education, and people desperately wanted it. So I went ahead and sold this one too. But I ended up where I did a lot of these pieces because people just thought it was interesting, or they liked the category, and it opened up opportunities. I'll just say, I haven't used all of these opportunities by any means, but people continually will find this design and say, oh, I am into Norse mythology, Valkyries. Can you make me a custom version of this? And there's lots of people who come out of the woodwork when you do something specific to a category. I will say, funny enough, though, my highest selling stock design on my very,
That
very
I like the peacock.
peacock feather for
Hey,
some reason sells a lot.
hey, it's got a 5-star review too. So, and it's
But
the
I will try and sell this.
onlystitch.com. So
Yeah.
guys, the onlystitch.com, that's where you can find Erich's designs. So I do want to ask you, you've been doing this for a really long time.
Yes.
Have you noticed that the industry has grown or shrunk over time as far as like how many people are in it and
Absolutely grown.
active?
Absolutely grown. It is much more active than it used to be. But here's what I'll say. Back in the day, I kind of I took some heat for talking to home and craft embroiderers as much as I do. But I always felt like the prosumer embroidery channel was providing the new embroiderers that were going to carry on kind of the industry. And I fully think that's the case. And here's the one thing I'll say. I felt very vindicated during the pandemic, because when they were shutting down big shops, they couldn't operate. It was the home embroiderers who kept on making things because they were working out of their own homes and they weren't being shut down as industrial, units. So I've kind of felt kind of vindicated. I'm like, these are people doing real work and they're doing quality work. And I'll say that the channel of being able to get software like we do it in Embrilliance, where you can buy a module and it's not super expensive, and then buy a machine. Hey, go to Walmart and buy the PE machines. That's fine. You can make good work on these machines. Would a large commercial machine like the beautiful ZSKs that I have in my green screen, are they fantastic?
Those are nice.
It's like driving a German car. Yes, they're lovely. They're lovely machines. They run very smoothly and they're very fast.
Hashtag not sponsored.
Hashtag not sponsored.
Not sponsored.
Just a machine that I love. But at the same time, do you have to have one to make embroidery that works? No. To learn embroidery? No. You can learn on what you have. You can learn starting from home machines. You can learn on the single needle and get really good foundations for the kinds of skills. And like I said, understanding distortion, understanding pull compensation, understanding how needle and thread and stabilizer and fabric come together to make designs without having to start at the top end. Is it beautiful to have a multi-needle machine? Absolutely. It's great. I love whenever I'm working on them. That's what I prefer. It's also what I started on. I was commercial first. But have I seen some really capable work coming out of single needles or out of the prosumer kind of the multi-needle home version machines? Those produce great work too. And there are pros and cons to both sides of those things. And people are making real businesses happen. If you're providing valuable work and your embroidery's good, whatever it's coming out of, if you're getting value out of that and the person who you're selling to is getting value out of it, you are already commercial. It might not be the same kind of commercial as somebody who's running hundreds of heads of embroidery, but you are providing a valuable service and it shouldn't be discounted.
Well, we're glad you're here. And I think it's great that you're here doing this for, folks like me and for everyone watching, because we want to learn from people with professional experience. That's the best people to learn from. So I'm so glad. Okay. All right, here we go. Meat Merp says, cost me $1,000 to get PE Design 11. And even after 5 months of trying it, to learn it, I feel like I'm alone as far as how to improve on my basic designs. That's a pretty pricey software there.
Can be. I mean, I'll go ahead and bring out the old story that I said while we were talking before the show. When I bought my first commercial seat of the software I used for most of my career, it was $16,000. The first time I bought my commercial software. So we are much more accessible now than we used to be.
Oh, yeah.
What I have to say, though, is get into the online communities that are out there. There are tons of groups on Facebook. There are tons of other groups out there. I know Embroidery Nerd's a great one that I belong to and hang out with those guys. So Embroidery Nerd on Facebook is a great group of folks. There's a bunch of other communities out there, tons of them. And if you find one where the people are decent, who are helpful without being rude, but they are showing each other their embroidery, get out there and share. You have to take the risk to share your stuff. Are you going to get some people who are not the nicest? It's going to happen. It's online, but you're going to find other people like me, because I'm active in all these groups too, who are going to stop and say, hey, you know what? It's pull compensation that's causing this problem. It's stuff like that's causing this problem. Here's what you can do to make things look better. It's about sharing your results and having people help you out with it. But I'll also say this, go read articles. There's a lot of the commercial magazines are free. People may not know this. Like the one that I write for in the UK, Images Magazine, you can read the digital edition every month for free. There's no strings on that. You can just read it. It's on their main website. Shows like mine, and I mean, obviously you're here. Jen's got the sewing report. She's showing the sewing half of it. People like me are showing the digitizing and embroidery half of it. And there's a lot of people doing live shows every week that are willing to answer questions or help you. And I would say certainly participating in the community is going to be really helpful for you. But you don't feel bad though. This is not a weird experience. And especially if this isn't your whole thing you're doing. I told everybody I started digitizing in 3 months. I was being paid. That's what I did. It eventually became my entire career for 20 years. I should be able to spend more time on it than people who are doing it for fun. And that's okay. I had a quick ramp up because I wanted to grow my own career from being the guy who ran machines to being the person in the design office who got to work on designs. So I had an incentive. I worked really hard to get there, but it's not normal for everybody to spend, 8 hours every night trying to learn this stuff. It's okay that it takes you some time.
That's really true. And you're right about the online communities. I feel like we're at the point where I don't know what it is, but I'm almost afraid to even post anything because I feel like no matter what you post, you're just going to get like pretty negative responses or people thinking you're stupid or, just like a lot of snark. So I feel like that can be kind of intimidating for people when they're going into these groups and trying to ask like just legitimate, just basic questions. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this today was because I see a lot of the same questions just over and over and over again. And I feel like we've touched on a lot of the major ones. So hopefully this will help you if you don't feel, I don't recommend Reddit as a forum. Reddit is probably the worst. Reddit and Facebook groups, it depends on the Facebook group. Some of them can be okay. And some of them you're like, oh my gosh. So I'm in one for, it's called, I'll go ahead and say it's called like, TV freelancers or something.
Okay, yeah.
So they're like people who have worked in broadcasting, who like freelance for networks and stuff like that. But if like they're very snobby about the gear though. So if you go in there and you don't have a 50K setup, like they just like jump all over, like they really are not very nice about the responses. But I would tell those people though, especially like the old school ones, is that and I think there's kind of a chip on their shoulder because they don't understand that you don't need super expensive stuff to succeed on like with online video. So like, if you're working for HBO, they've got certain technical parameters. If you have a YouTube channel, there are channels with millions and millions of subs who do it on phones.
Absolutely.
So that's what frustrates me about some of the old school people in any industry is that they're very, they tend to be very unaccepting of newcomers sometimes. And I've also noticed this about the quilting space as well. And then they don't like any way that's not their way. So if it's not their way, they're not into it.
You're always going to find that. What I will say, I've been blessed because especially working at Embrilliance, the Embrilliance groups are super accepting. They're of the groups that I've been in for software, they are some of the most accepting. Also, why did I mention?
All right, I'll have to join those groups then.
The Embrilliance Facebook groups are really accepting. Sometimes people will have, especially when there's questions that get asked all the time that are in the FAQ that they come up every day 5 times.
And it's like, you should probably check that first before you post anything.
They will send you to the FAQ page. They'll send you to the notes at the top. For sure, they'll do that, but everybody's there to help. And it's the other way around. Whereas some groups are all negative with a couple of nice people, it's the other way around where it's mostly positive people with a couple of negative people.
That's refreshing.
To that the embroidery nerd group.
To that point, it is on the person asking to check the previous post history to say, hey, is this something that there's been 87 posts on? Then maybe I can. And a lot of people are not doing that. And that can be frustrating for the people who are like regulars because you're like, oh my gosh, not this question about copyright stuff again. That's something that's asked in the Etsy forum a lot is about copyright stuff. Because someone's like, they're like, I want to make Disney merch. I'm like, you can't do that, man. Don't even try that. This is kind of another question out of left field. So I don't know. Did you ever watch the show Game of Thrones?
Not really. I watched a little bit of it, but I've seen some of it.
You might enjoy this. I have HBO Max, and on there's a lot of videos like they do a lot of behind the scenes on the set design and the costume design. Yes. And
I love this.
What the work like when you were talking about your background with props, the amount like people have no idea the amount of effort, time, and money that goes into very small things is incredible. And watching those, I really enjoy watching those behind the scenes features because they really point out like, hey, here's this dress, and they actually had a lot of embroidery on the show. So some of it was so intricate, and it was just really, if you're out there and you're just looking for some just cool knowledge, those are good ones to watch because they really go into the
Totally.
like they'll spend, I don't know, like a year at a I don't know, like I don't even know how they get these things together because I see the finished work and I'm like, I don't even know how that's possible. It's incredible. And just the things they're doing, the things that creatives are doing with designing and with making things, it just blows me out of the water because I'm just so impressed with everything.
I think that's one of the things. There's so much inspiration that we can take out there. Like I said earlier, one of the best ways to learn about embroidery and breaking things up. What I always talk about is people look at art and they don't understand how I got from the original art to the final piece to the different elements that I drew to make it work. Look at other embroidery. I mean, other embroidery
Mm,
is out there to help you. Look at other people's work. It's not bad. In fact, I've got here, I'll show you a thing.
okay.
I'll post something on the screen just to show you a piece I did, a really commercial piece. So if we bring up the slide, I'll drop it real quick on my screen. But yeah, we can break things up with the shapes that are there. The thing is, just look at the embroidery and you can see different stitch types. This is a piece that I did for a jacket bag for a company called Crane. It's a Crane company, but they actually are called Crane, one of the various companies they run. But you can see these natural shapes like the body panels and the tread. It's a fill stitch. It's a nice big wide area that you can fill. Some of these are very narrow ribbon-like shapes. They're long and narrow. It's a good thing for a satin stitch. You got these that have some curves to them. You might want to have different texture between the treads in the tire and the curve on the side of the tire. These are things that we can see. And in the final piece, we can kind of bring that out with the embroidery. The different stitch types are great for these different pieces. But you can go look at other people's work. Go online and search embroidery and the thing you want to look at. Look at stock designs and you can see, well, okay, this is a satin stitch right here. This is a curved fill stitch. This is another flat fill stitch. We can look at the angles. And these are all things we can see in the finished piece without having their original file. You can see the kind of stitch types that were used. You can see the kind of ways things were layered, and you can get an idea for how things are put together just by looking at the kind of embroidery that's done. Here's like a sample piece of this kind of layering. I did this papal banner. It's like it's a Pope's kind of coat of arms is what that is. And you can see how I'm layering together these satin stitches and fills. Look at other people's embroidery. But what I'll say is it's not just machine embroidery.
Mm,
Look, we can't do everything that a hand embroiderer can do, but embroidery and weaving and different kinds of fiber arts are really great at showing us what threads can show us, what we can do as far as making marks of thread. And how I kind of always put it is that you should consume broadly and create with focus. Look at all kinds of different embroidery. Look at streetwear. Look at home decor. Look at fashion. Look at bridal. And then say, what kind of ways do they use stitches to fill areas? And then go back to your art and say, how can I fill these spaces? How can I make cool textures? How can I put those together? Then learn a little bit about your software, about how we draw shapes and what I need to do to get those shapes, and play. Give yourself the license and the space to play with your software, to play with your embroidery, and just let the result be what it is. Do some projects for yourself that no one's ever going to see, and just play with it and let it be like low risk. Just try it out, play with different stuff. And even if you're in the commercial world, you're doing this for 20 years like I am, I still play. I make new textures. I play with different stuff. I play with the tools. I try and find new ways to make marks all the time. I run samples every week. So you're never going to be finished with it, but you're also never probably going to find the edge of what's possible.
that's true. So do you, besides the embroidery, do you do any traditional sewing, anything like that?
I'm not that good.
Nice.
It's terrible because my mom was a seamstress. I mean, using her terms, I don't know. People say sewist or
Yeah,
sewer.
there's so many different, yeah.
So just so you know, this is not like me going on a gendered rant about seamstresses. That's what my mom always said. She was a seamstress in her era.
Or
And
sewer, which also
yes,
looks like sewer.
sewer. That's why I never know
Okay.
to say. I say
Yeah.
sewist now. Some
I,
people
I
like
think
that one.
sewist is a pretty good
Sewist is pretty
catch-all,
good. It's a good
you
one for
know.
everybody who feels inclusive. But my mom used to sew all the time, and still, and her work is incredible. And I am just terrible. I hem curtains, and it makes me sweat. Even though I can embroider. And also, they always
Yeah, you
tell
can
me,
do these elaborate
yeah,
designs, but
but
hemming pants might be a challenge. And that just shows like
I've had to learn. Yeah, I
you
had to
might be
learn.
good in one area and maybe another area is not,
Totally.
maybe not your thing, and that's
I can
okay too.
I can open up a seam so that I can embroider inside something and sew the lining back in.
Nice.
Okay, but not great. Like that's not the primary thing I do. I'm not, and I know people who are much better. A good friend of mine, he and his son Jeff Fuller and his son Adam Fuller, they actually run a little hat company and they make their own structured hats. I mean, literally sew them themselves with commercial machines, but it's a home-based business that they make their own cool hats. He does these jujitsu hats made out of old gi material from jujitsu. So it's really cool stuff, but they had to learn all of these other techniques and stuff. And I would tell people, if you become a specialist, you may or may not do that. I am not the best at sewing. Those guys do awesome work that I'm always like jealous, because they do this cool stuff where they can make the hat after they sew it if they want, which makes it more possible to access different parts of the hat.
Yeah, and then they can, because I do embroidery before I cut out pattern pieces sometimes. I'm like, all right, that's going to be way easier.
Panel program. I used to do custom apparel. We did, funny enough, into the casino market. They would do all these custom apparel pieces that had specialty borders and stuff. And I would design the embroidery portion to make the borders and to make them line up the way I want to, and color tips. But we would then just give flat stock over to these folks, and it had lines. I would embroider actually specific lines to help them do their cutting. And then they would cut them out and make the shirts. I was always just so tickled, because it's like covers up the back. I can have everything lined. I don't have to worry about so much of how the back looks. And they would do these custom pieces that I could do borders I could never really access on a finished garment. Panel program is so cool, but I'll admit it. The funny thing is, going both directions. I also had people say, "Oh, you're this great embroiderer. Your mom must have taught you so much about embroidery." No,
like,
she doesn't do any embroidery.
Yeah, and it's funny because people kind of put all of these things into one category. So they think if you do one thing, you must do everything. So you'll get people requests. I'm sure you probably had people asking you to like recover chairs or like something really. They're like, absolutely. Oh, you do stuff with fabric and sewing. So
you build your dream team. That's what I love. Is I've worked with upholsterers, especially auto upholsterers. I've done a lot of show car stuff or renovations. The great thing was I had somebody bring me, they had this like 1930s limousine, and they brought me the original trim out of it. It was all dry rotted and awful. And they actually found an original technical drawing from the people who made this really cool old limousine. And I created a new file to make the new trim. But then they took that to their upholsterer. And when all the different craftspeople got together, they reupholstered this thing. And part of the embroidery was part my design. I just love that. That kind of coming together of the different craftspeople who are in our similar industries is just fantastic. And I've gotten, it's nice.
That's a good business tip too, because maybe one way to stand out is to have like a lot of different types of services under one umbrella. If you can do signs, if you can do embroidery, if you can do upholstery, then people kind of get, you're kind of a one-stop shop.
Yeah, I used to do
that's maybe another thing.
Vinyl signage. I've done vinyl signage on buildings and on cars, and I've done. I helped put graphics on police cars and SWAT wheels before.
Have you done any bedazzling, Eric?
No, but no. I don't know if you know.
It can be fun.
Ninja. I know.
I follow her. Awesome. I have her crystal katana. I ordered that.
She's awesome. I've gotten to be with her in person a few times at trade shows. I'm awesome.
So jealous. All right. Well, Eric, if you ever get a call from the band BTS to do any custom work, you have to let me know, okay? Or anybody, anybody from Korea, let me know, because I'm all into that stuff, and they do a lot of embroidered stuff. So
love it.
So I would love to know. And it's funny when you get into embroidery, then you notice everything. You're like, totally. Oh my gosh, look at what they did with this thing, or. You start to notice it in stores, and you're like, what's going on with me?
It's a funny story. My wife always takes me out shopping, and I am terribly embarrassing to shop for apparel with, because I turn everything inside out. I stare at everything. I take pictures. And this is the one thing I'll admit that's maybe not the nicest thing to admit, or the funniest thing. It makes me look bad. I get caught looking at people's jackets too long, and they're like, is that person staring at me? I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Your jacket's got a design
what's going on?
Look at. Yeah. So I've had that problem, or that I'm sitting with my wife and she's looking at garments, and I'm turning all the dresses inside out and looking at all the pieces and parts.
And you're like, you want to know, how did they finish this and what's stable? So I was at Goodwill a few months ago, and I found this really high quality jacket. It was like, it had like kind of like it was a really good quality fabric, and then it had like kind of a fleecy inside. And it was a Chick-fil-A employee jacket. And it said Sophia. It had Sophia R embroidered on it. I bought it. It was $4. But you're right. Like, I could do a patch over it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I could do with it. My husband's been wearing it outside when it's cold. So he's awesome. Now. So I call him Sophia R now. I also, in my mind, I want to know the backstory. Like, why did she leave Chick-fil-A? Like, what was, what was the deal? Why did the jacket end up? Did she get a promotion? Did she get another job? I don't know. I'm curious. And how did that really nice jacket end up at Goodwill for $4?
I've had
So
some of those. What I loved is I had a guy who used to go thrift vintage bowling shirts, and I would always replace all the names for him with his name. But it was
I
like
like that.
the wild stuff, the hand guided embroidery from back in the day. It was just beautiful stuff. Sometimes I hated covering even the names because they
You're
would
like,
have.
you just kind of want to keep it as is if
Yeah,
it's really cool.
I would try and do the least damage I could because they had these hand guided chain stitch names on them, and they luckily he was always
That's so
trying to
cool.
keep the back. The back it was usually where they had larger graphics, so usually I wasn't doing anything with that. But it was so cool just to see all that stuff. And
Yeah.
like I say, I think even after this many years, I'm still a fan of embroidery. So when you get into this as an industry, you can still love it as a hobby while you do it. You just have to make sure you don't kind of kill your love for it with the guilt and the technical stuff and the rest of it that makes it harsh. You can still love it. Just give yourself like that creative space and keep consuming the embroidery that's out there and the cool other decorations. I love this stuff, and I'm glad other people still do too.
Very cool. Well, we really appreciate you joining us, Eric. Guys, last call for questions. So if you have any questions, drop them here right now, and we'll try to get to them. And I would also encourage anyone watching on the replay, if you have questions, actually don't leave a comment here. Go over to Eric's channel. I'm gonna link it in the comments, and tune in on Fridays because you talk to people live. So if you have additional questions, obviously this, if you're watching this after it's over, it's ended. So I would encourage you, don't leave a comment here. Go over to Eric's channel, so hit the subscribe button, and tune in on Fridays at 2:30 Mountain Time for his live show. And or even comment on one of his other videos. Show Eric some love, because he's the one that can really teach you about digitizing. I get people emailing me too, and I'm like, I'm not the person to ask. I use a machine, and I use stuff that I buy online, but I am certainly not an expert. And I did have some company reach out like a while ago, and they're like, hey, we'll give you this software if you do videos on this. And I was like, first of all, it would take me so long to learn the software that it would take me forever. So this is probably not a good. So you kind of know, you're like, this is not going to be, and that's the other thing is when I'm doing videos about something, I want them to actually have good information. And if I don't feel very confident about being able to present it well, I'm probably not going to do it. And that was a subject I just was not personally comfortable with trying to, learn a software and then do a video on how to use the software when I'm like, yeah, this is not going to work.
The other thing I'm going to say for sure, if you're listening to all the stuff I said that sounded technical earlier and you're like, man, I'm never going to digitize, that's fine.
Pay someone else to digitize.
And on top of it, personalizing your own stock designs, I love that stuff. I see people grab essentials, they get their own text, they get like Merrily, so they can do some cool patch border or use some of the patch borders I made or some of the fonts I made for Embrilliance when we were doing that stuff. And they make these really cool things out of a little stock design and a little bit of text here, or they cut a couple stock designs together and they make these incredible combinations. Hey, just like collage is still art, putting together these different creative inspirational pieces that you like into a new thing is still art. You don't have to feel like that's not creative.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And especially when a design can look so different with different thread choices and different fabrics you're working on. I like to do towels as it's a really easy gift. So even just having that knowledge is really, before we go, I do want to ask you, do you have any like embroidery hacks or like really great tips for when you're stitching out, like anything where you're like, where maybe it'll be a game changer for somebody? Do you have any pro tips?
Honestly, yes. The big pro tip for me is this. We talked earlier about having issues with using different kinds of fabrics, and especially when it comes down to things like toweling, heavy pile, knockdown stitch. If you're in Embrilliance, it's literally called knockdown stitch. It's their term, and that's in the enthusiast package. I like to use a bidirectional or a mesh type. So it's a mesh that has essentially a fill that's at 45 degrees, another fill at 135 degrees, and it goes underneath the entire design. You can run designs that are not meant for toweling on top of a knockdown stitch that matches the color of that towel, and it looks very nice. It will allow incredibly fine detail to still be rendered on things that are heavy like toweling. And the other thing is knit hats. We talked about that earlier. Knockdown works really well as a stabilizer and as a way to flatten out the background of knit hats. And so you can use stock designs that are light, that are not meant for those materials, by using those knockdown stitches. If you're in another software, you can also create it either by looking for them. Sometimes they will have a similar type of thing, or you can make fills that go around the shape and just have one fill that is a light fill, maybe 30 points. So like 3mm spacing, one at 45 degrees, one at 135 degrees. So it looks like a little chain link fence. And you put that behind that design in the color that fades into the background, and it will hold up that stitching. So that's a big hack. It lets you use designs. And we did it in the commercial world. We would often have designs that were made for little polo shirts, like I talked about before, and then we'd have one knit hat they wanted to add. Well, throw that knockdown stitch behind it, and it would hold up on that one knit hat. Oh, you're still muted.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was muted. Sorry, guys. The beanies and the knit caps seem to be everywhere.
Oh.
And I got one from YouTube actually sent me an embroidered beanie. Nice. And I noticed they use cutaway stabilizer in the back. So I was like, is that what you'd recommend? Or
it depends. The thing that's hard is that
it was very visible. That's the thing. It was very visible. So you're like, okay.
It's so hard because if you have like tearaway, people like to use tearaway or washaways on knits. But if you have unsupported logos, like let's say you don't use a knockdown stitch, you don't use anything else behind it, and you have multiple letters all separately, when the hat stretches, the letters will try and come apart or they will tilt out of phase with each other and they look terrible. They look kind of wacky. They go all different directions. Then using something like some sort of cutaway stabilizer, I would have at least gone with like a no-show mesh or something lighter.
That's true.
It will hold the design together so that when you stretch the rest of the hat, the design doesn't stretch and go weird. However, especially if it's on the kind of knit hat that's on your head that's not flipped over, a flipped over one where the logo is on the rolled section, you can put a big piece of backing in it, no big deal. The stabilizer.
Yeah, and that is what they did on it. So at least they did that. So at least it wasn't like on the inside of the hat or anything.
It's better, but you know, in that case, really careful close trimming is your friend. Be careful and trim close to trim out the excess backing. But also a couple layers of no-show mesh if it's a real heavy kind of design, or just using something like a no-show mesh where it's lighter. So once you do cut it away, it's not a big deal. Better option. Or sometimes you can find, depending on the design, if the design is whole, like it has a filled area under the whole thing, it's badge-like, or has something that holds it together, you can use things like, they have washaways that leave material inside, that leave a fiber inside. Sometimes those kinds of stabilizers are used in commercial stuff because they have to be laundered for the rest of the.
Yeah, that's true. And is that how all the commercial embroidery, like on clothes you get in stores, that's how they have nothing showing on the inside?
Frequently, yes. You'll find where there's just little fibers. You'll see just little fibers that are trapped just under the embroidery. That's often something that has to be laundered out. What it essentially is fibers suspended in the same kind of stuff that would be for full wash away, the kind of stuff that entirely washes away, like the stuff people understand under the trade name Vilene in the home market. But like a fully wash away stabilizer, they'll have fibers that don't wash away inside of one of those, so that when you do wash, the embroidery itself is holding those fibers.
Yeah. What product is that? I want to try that out. Okay, I want to try that one out.
Names, but yeah, it's something where that I haven't seen it sold as often because, especially in the commercial world, we can't, or at least not all customers like a laundered garment. They want to see that really clean looking flat finish with all the sizing when a garment comes out of the box. Because I actually used to do a specialty treatment where we used a topper that was a thick water soluble and left these very loose kind of dimensional stitches on top. They looked kind of distressed and interesting, but we had to launder everything and people didn't like the look of the garment. So it was really hard to sell it. Whereas it was used for a long time, or at least it was used for a lot more garments when it was being done on jeans and stuff. I saw a bunch of it being used in like American Eagle and Hollister during the period that it was popular, because it was way easier they were doing other kinds of wash treatments like you would do to jeans. They were going to launder the garments, but for commercial stuff, not as much. Home market, now people are using a lot more of that stuff. And it's interesting to see because there's just more willingness to add that step and that extra labor, and also less difficulty with that look.
I did an experiment a while ago where I took 4 t-shirts, one the same, two cotton, 100% cotton shirts, t-shirts, and then 2 poly cotton blend shirts. I added HTV and embroidery to each one, and I did one of each. I did one that I pre-washed and one that I did not pre-wash. And I was expecting the pre-washed ones to look better, and then I washed them 10 times.
Yeah.
And the the unwashed ones did better at the end for both of the shirts. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm not pre-washing stuff anymore.
Well, it
'Cause
depends how you wash. I mean,
yeah,
that's the other thing, especially when we're talking about like HTV. I've done a fair amount of heat press stuff. You have to be really careful what you put on the garment. If you put softeners or anything else that's going to be on the garment, you're going to change what
yeah.
that
And
surface
I don't use any fabric softener or anything. And then when I pre-washed them, I didn't use any detergent either. So I just
Okay.
did water. And then when I do my laundry, I
Yeah.
always wash on tap cold, and then
Yeah.
I tumble dry
Same
low,
here.
but I don't leave it in for very long. So I usually kind of leave, because I don't want the heat to break down the garment too much. So
Yeah.
that's my usual. So I kind of did my usual laundry cycle, but
Okay.
without the detergent. And yeah, I was surprised. The pre-washing didn't make it any better. Like as far as after I washed it the 10 times, I was like, all right, I guess I'm not gonna
I'll say this much.
do that. I was like, all
If
right, I guess.
anybody who's selling anything, learn the laundry instructions not only for the garment that you have there, but for the thread.
Yeah.
This is a big deal. Rayon versus polyester is a fight that people get into because rayon runs
Ooh.
at lighter tensions and it
Yeah.
looks very shiny and nice. It doesn't hold up to chlorine bleach or industrial laundering. So if you're doing something for a hotel or a hospital,
And you can't do rayon. That's interesting. So you
use
can't do
rayon.
rayon.
It'll
Okay.
bleed. It'll bleed. It's not
Okay.
color fast. Also, abrasion. If you're doing something for a contractor, it's going to get roughed up. The polyester will hold up better than the rayon to
Okay.
abrasion. And also
Good to
color
know.
fastness outside. There are threads now that have ceramic in them. They're matte finish polyester threads that hold up to a lot of UV. Whereas if you just use standard embroidery thread, you might find that it fades. If you do something like people will do seat covers for a boat or something, and they find out it fades quickly. Or you do something like an outdoor pillow for your kind of like lawn chair set. If you do that in rayon, if you do that in some polyesters, you're going to see different rates at which those will age out, especially in the New Mexico sun. Our things get bleached and dry rotted really quickly.
Yeah. And you kind of know in certain situations, customers would come back to you if the garment didn't hold up over a few washes, or if like if the thread bled or something that.
Yeah, we had that happen to us one time. We had unfortunately one of our operators mixed in red rayon on an order of lab coats.
Oh no,
So
and
they all turned pink.
Okay.
Because we had some poly, some rayon, and so like 25% of the lab coats came back with pink streaks on them. So you do have to be careful with that. And I'll say there was an entire era where for some reason Jeep owners were getting big embroidered wheel covers. And I did a ton of those, and those, depending on what thread you use, it made a big difference to color fastness.
Yeah. I was actually going to do another experiment where I tried seeing what happens when I, like with different threads, and I was going to try to bleach them and see what happened. Just to show what happens. Because I've heard that that the rayon thread bleeds and that it's not color fast. So I kind of wanted to find out, but the pre-washing experiment was pretty interesting because it went against what I thought was going to happen.
Oh, the thing is, when people do abusive wash cycles and they're doing really hot drying, hot washing, what I'll say is, guys, turn your stuff inside out. Your embroidered stuff too. The less you can abrade, you can scratch or rub it. It will always be better off. And like I said, when we do commercial stuff, one of the things I encourage people to do, if you do what's called hang tagging, where you put your own punch tag that hangs off of the inside tag on the garment, have wash instructions in there as well as your marketing information. So people know where to go to order it again, and they know how to wash it correctly. And I recommend for, especially for embroidery that has any kind of specialty techniques, or like the blended threads, like the wool blend threads that have fuzz to them, wash them very delicately and turn those things inside out, and they'll live longer.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes it is important to, you're right, communicate to customers how they should be taking care of these items so that they don't come back and say, hey, this got ruined, when it was really, just due to like use and abuse, and that you don't really want that to come back. Yeah. That's true.
For sure. That's why I talk about that consultation rather than being commodity. If you're somebody who wants to work in the hospital industry, learn the kind of fonts that it takes to put the really small division names and names underneath the logos, have those locked and loaded, have the right kind of thread, know what needles work on those coats, and make sure that you're stocking the right colors for the hospital locations around you in the threads that make sense in polyester, and know how to tell them, what they need for the washing instructions. It will help. I mean, it's one of those things. When you are trustworthy to provide a solution, embroidery is just part of what you offer, and it's often the other stuff that seems a little less tangible that keeps people coming back. It's the full experience that's your brand.
Yeah. Well, Erich, this has been an amazing couple of hours. I can't believe it's 5:30. Wow.
Yeah, it's almost
And
time, right?
I really appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you.
You know, you've shared with us, and I've learned a lot even from this conversation. Guys, again, all right, if you have questions, I would encourage you to head over to Erich Campbell's channel, Erich with an H at the end, subscribe, and tune in on Fridays at 2:30 Mountain Time so you can watch the live show, and then you can ask your questions if you didn't get to ask them
Sure.
today. Erich, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything. And guys, if you're watching, you're also welcome to check out all of my other embroidery videos here on the Sewing Report. Got a lot of them, but we really wanted to do an episode specifically about digitizing because I've just been inundated with questions, and I obviously am not the person to ask. So, Erich, thank you. We really appreciate everything. And yeah, next you got to go over to the Erich Campbell YouTube. I'm telling you guys, go over there. Wealth of information, and that's a really great place to learn. So I'm Jen with the Sewing Report, signing off. I'll see you guys again in the next one. And remember, whatever you're doing, make it fun.